We have here what looks to be a 79 Super Reverb. And the store I do local work for has this for sale as a consignment, which means that the seller would be responsible for either doing any work the amp needs before it's sold, or the buyer needs to know what the condition is before they decide whether to buy it. In this case, we're in that latter category. A potential buyer is interested in this amp, wants to know what kind of shape it's in, said that the volume makes weird noises above 2. We'll check that out. And someone had replaced the master volume pot with a little toggle switch. He wants that replaced. We'll take a look at that in a minute, but first let's see what's underneath the doghouse, because this is where an amp's fortune is made or lost. And if this were a 69 or earlier Super Reverb, short of fire damage, almost anything would be justifiable. When it comes to a 79, there can be things which turn out to be more expensive than the buyer or seller thinks is worth, etc., etc. The math changes. So let's see what's underneath here. All right, not only has this amp been recapped, it looks as if it might have been recapped by me, and I just don't recall working on this amp. So let me check through my records real quick. All right, I went through my records, and of the 30 plus Super Reverbs I've worked on in the last 6 or so years, I found this one. And in November of 17, I did this work. That's why I didn't remember it. And problems found and services performed. Let me just do that checklist. Filter caps leaking. All electrolytic caps need replacing. All electrolytic caps replaced with F&T for filter caps and Vishays for cathode bypass caps. 1K and 4.7K interstage resistors replaced with 3-watt metal oxides. Vibrato clicking but not working. Replaced faulty 220K resistor, faulty LDR lamp, the Roach leaking 10 nanofarad cap, resoldered wire to RCA jack. Bad 6L6 power tubes, installed new match pair of tongue saws, biased amp, missing auxiliary speaker jack, installed switchcraft 11A, vibrato defeat switch popping, added 10 meg leak resistor to remove DC from switch. That's the switch which is in place of the master volume at present, per the then owner's request. Screen grid resistors on output tubes overheated, unreliable, installed 3-watt 470 ohm resistors, sockets cleaned. One speaker not working, reconnected quick connect terminal, tightened connections, power plug pulling off cable unsafe, installed high quality replacement cable. All right, so in November of 17 I did that. Subsequently, the owner put the amp up for sale on consignment, which tells me that a lot of things which would normally be big issues in these are not. It's not going to be a big issue in this, so there's not going to be a high cost. I can tell you that if it's having a strange sound with the volume above 2, it's most likely some of these old preamp tubes, which seem to be, I can see International Combine, I think it says, on the ECC 81, some old 70s Fender 12AX7s. So let's flip this around and power it on and see what it sounds like. All right, looking through this amp for the first time in 4 years, I'm reminded that there's a blend of work that I did and that a previous guy did. And it still has a lot of the CBS era spaghetti. Let's move on down to the other end. Here in the middle, you can see, again, a blend of things I did, like the new screen grids, things the previous tech did, like these 1 ohms on the cathodes, and still fairly stock in the power stuff. One crucial thing I did to this is I installed artificial center tap balance resistors here and replaced the old hum balance pot that was by the preamp tubes, because those pots don't have a good ground for that balance and they almost invariably burn. One other thing I did on this amp was I removed the output tubes matching circuit and put in actual bias control. So you can actually control the how hot or cold the bias is, as opposed to just how that bias voltage is distributed to the two output tubes. This is that tremolo defeat switch. Previous tech had installed that. I had just depopped it by adding that little 10 meg across it. There's a free tip for you. So once I see why the amp is making the reported noise with a volume above 2, which we're about to discover together, I will then call the owner to see if he wants me to install pretty much the same master volume that was in this originally, without the push-pull nonsense, or whether he would like me to do a better sounding Larmar style master volume. I'm fine with either way. Let's see what the amp is sounding like first. All right, I've unplugged the lav mic for this next bit because the phone mic picks up sounds in the room better. First, powering it on, taking out a standby, I notice there's a hum. And this amp would not have hummed when I did work on it 6 years ago. And that could be any of the preamp tubes or the phase inverter. A little bit of noise if I wiggle V1 or V4. Let's see what it sounds like on the normal channel. Goes loud really fast. '79 pots have the wrong tapers. Those pots need to be cleaned a little bit. I'll revisit that. Let's go to the reverb channel and see if we can replicate that weird sound above 2 on the volume he was describing. Remember, I'm hearing this for the first time along with you. Besides being really loud, really fast, I'm not hearing any weird sound. Other than that hum and some pots that need to be cleaned. So I'm wondering if he's got a problem with his speakers. Right now I have this connected to my test cab, which is 8 ohms and an 8 ohm dummy load. It's once a 2 ohm output. I've got it with a 4 ohm load right now. The old transformers in these can handle that mismatch for testing at what are relatively low volumes. So let me bring its cab in and hook it up and see what it sounds like. All right, I've got the speakers in the combo hooked up to it, and I'm hearing a lot more white noise than it was. Not getting any weird noise as he described. And I want to see if that hum is in the preamp or the power section first. So the first thing I'm going to do is put in standby. I'm going to pull V4, which is the reverb mixer stage, which is all the output of this channel. I'm going to pull V1, which will disable this channel. If we still have hum, it's either in the phase inverter or the power section. Now the pins are that clean. That'll get addressed in a little while. So I know we've got a hum in the output, but when I had unplugged from this channel, there was some crackle. And then as I moved the, sorry about the chair making so much noise, then as I moved the chassis, there was some more crackle. And if the chassis is flexing, it's possible that one of these grounds soldered to the chassis is having issues. This is one of the grounds coming from the filter caps. And it's going to this chassis mounting location. This is a great example of what I've been talking about in other videos. All right. This is where those chassis grounds for the filter caps are being made. And this is held the chassis by this caps nut and a little blob of solder. I'll turn the amp off for this next bit. But you can kind of see, it's real apparent to the eye, that this area of the chassis is deformed from the weight of this transformer over the years. If I loosen this caps nut, which is already pretty loose, by the way, I didn't have to use any real force to turn that, just 2 fingers. I should have had to get some elbow grease into that. And I repeat, this amp would not have hummed 6 years ago when I last had it, or it would not have gone out. And I probably said, I'd really like to change that because they're not reliable and they probably didn't have it in the budget. But as you can see, this ground, which is the main ground in the entire amp as far as the filter caps go, was soldered to chassis and was screwed to this transformer mounting bolt. And through the years, the steel of the chassis deformed here where the mounting bolt was, which did 2 things. It made this caps nut useless because the level that caps nut was at was no longer the surface level of the chassis. The chassis went down, which meant that this was no longer reinforcing the connection of this to chassis, which meant that as the chassis moved, this did not, and so that ground broke. And that's how you find problems like this. And there's a ground there like that, and there's a ground for the, let me zoom out so you can see what I'm talking about. So we have this ground, which is gone, it needs to be redone. And this one here, which is part of the center tap stuff. And this one for the bias. And all these need to be redone properly. And that will probably solve all these mystery noises and the that output hum. So let me call the owner or would-be owner and tell him what I have found. And if the buyer does not want to have this done because he chooses not to buy the amp, then the seller needs to pay me to have this done because this amp is obviously not going to be quiet until that's done. And it really won't be that safe until this is done. You really need to have your grounds solid. People limp along in a lot of ways, but this is not the kind of place where you can take shortcuts. And it's not that expensive for me to fix this properly and make these solder joints directly to chassis like they were done before CBS took over. All right, I spoke to the owner, who's actually friends with the seller. So this is a very non-combative situation, which is nice. So he has authorized me to redo these grounds, and he asked about the master volume Larimar thing. And I said, well, I'll tell you what, for my money, what I'd spend it on an amp like this, because you don't really need a master volume in a Super Reverb. I'm going to put a standard vintage circuit 1 meg master volume in there, which is pretty much out of the circuit when it's on 10. I'm not doing the push-pull boost thing that this amp might have had back in the day. That's really simple. Where we're going to spend his money, and not a ton of money, but it's well spent. So we're going to replace the volume and tone stack controls on each channel, because on these later 70s amps, they're using pot tapers that are nowhere near the sound and performance of the pre-CBS and early CBS amps. So we're going to get all that just a little bit nicer and clean up some of the spaghetti in the process. That handling noise you might have seen earlier in the video when I touched these wires should magically go away. Be a lot less wire, much better response, and crucially it won't go from nothing to, my God, that's loud. And pretty much all the pots except for the reverb and trim pots are getting replaced with new ones like this, because all these old ones here are push-ons, and we're getting the new high-quality pots take set screw stuff. So, at the end of the day, it's 79 silver face with a nice little bend to the panel. So this amp's seen things, man. It is very much a player's amp. So let's get it ready to play.